Mr. First Minister Breakford, agintariok, bazkideok, lagunok, egunon eta ongi etorri Bilbao Metropoli 30 elkarteak urtero antolatzen duen etorkizuneko metropoliak nazioarteko mintegira. Lehenik eta behin eskerrik asko ekitaldi honetara etortzeagatik eta eskerrik asko bereziki nazioarteko hizlarioi eta erakunde bazkideen ordezkariei. Buenos días y muchas gracias por asistir a esta nueva edición del Seminario Metrópolis de Futuro que todos los años organiza nuestra asociación Bilbao Metrópoli 30. Queremos agradecer especialmente al primer ministro Drakeford y al Gobierno vasco, socio fundador de Bilbao Metrópoli 30, su colaboración en la edición de este año y queremos agradecer igualmente a todas las personas que representan entidades asociadas que van a participar en las sesiones de debate de esta mañana, así como a los y las ponentes internacionales que nos van a acompañar hoy. Disculpo la asistencia de nuestro presidente José Antonio Garrido, quien por motivos familiares lamentablemente no nos va a poder acompañar hoy como estaba previsto y quien me ha pedido que personalmente traslade su agradecimiento a todas las personas asistentes y ponentes esta mañana. El objetivo de este seminario Metrópolis de Futuro es compartir experiencias y proyectos internacionales vinculados a los retos urbanos globales que puedan ser de utilidad para nuestra metrópoli. De esta manera, nuestra asociación Bilbao Metrópoli 30 cumple con una de sus funciones principales, que es explorar iniciativas y proyectos de carácter estratégico y de gran atractivo intelectual que nos ayuden en nuestro proceso de reflexión estratégica y también para avanzar en el proceso de revitalización de nuestra metrópoli. Bilbao Metrópoli 30 es una asociación público-privada que cuenta con 140 entidades públicas, empresas privadas y organizaciones sociales asociadas, eta gure helburua da hausnarketa prozesu bat sustatzea eta ahalegin publiko-pribatuak bateratzea etorkizuneko ikuspegi bateratu batean. Stay Human, Be Sustainable. Ese es el título que proponemos para las distintas sesiones de debate de esta mañana. Nos parece que este mensaje sintetiza los principales retos a los que se enfrentan nuestras ciudades y nuestras metrópolis hoy en día. Nos encontramos en un momento que pone en cuestión varios de los paradigmas en los que hemos apoyado nuestra competitividad y nuestra prosperidad en las últimas décadas. Muhammad Yunus, Premio Nobel de la Paz en 2006, ya hablaba de un mundo cero carbono, cero pobreza y cero exclusión, haciendo con ello referencia a las necesidades principales de los seres humanos, que son la ecológica, la económica y la social. Estos retos ya estaban presentes y ya amenazaban de una u otra manera a nuestras economías y a nuestras sociedades, pero sabemos que la pandemia del COVID-19 y la guerra de Ucrania han contribuido a magnificarlos y a agudizarlos. Esta crisis ha sometido todo a examen y con ella nos hemos hecho conscientes de nuestras estructuras de cristal. Por eso creemos que también esta crisis puede ser un momento para parar, a comprender y a actuar para proteger lo que realmente importa. Y creemos que lo que realmente importa en nuestras ciudades y en nuestras metrópolis es precisamente eso: Stay Human, Be Sustainable. ¿Por qué Stay Human? ¿Por qué luchar porque nuestros entornos urbanos sean, ante todo y sobre todo, humanos? Necesitamos ciudades en las que la dignidad humana sea respetada en todos sus sentidos. Nuestras ciudades han crecido y han evolucionado y siguen haciéndolo. Buscamos que sean eficientes y ordenadas, pero debemos preguntarnos si también siguen siendo plenamente humanas. La Carta de Atenas en 1937 supuso la consolidación del pensamiento de 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐩𝐨𝐿, que apostaba porque las ciudades que tenían éxito eran las que se movían rápido. Y como consecuencia de ello hemos ido concentrando poco a poco en nuestros entornos urbanos la riqueza, los recursos, la actividad. Hemos diseñado lugares cada vez más eficientes en la parte productiva y también más estéticos, pero al mismo tiempo crece la desconexión, la soledad, la desigualdad, el anonimato, las enfermedades mentales. Por eso, cuando hablamos de un entorno humano, estamos hablando de una visión holística e integral del ser humano dentro del entorno urbano en el que habita. Y eso va mucho más allá de la planificación urbana. Eso tiene que ver también con la responsabilidad de las empresas en los entornos en los que trabaja. Implica también la importancia del comercio como valor fundamental de nuestra vida de barrio. Hace referencia también a la necesidad de la naturaleza también en nuestras vidas urbanas. Y también hace referencia al derecho de todas las personas a tener un techo que le cobije. Y también nos referimos con ello a la responsabilidad social del cuidado, superando modelos que lo feminizan y que lo invisibilizan. Porque sin ese cuidado, nuestras ciudades y nuestras metrópolis no podrían levantar la persiana cada mañana y nuestro sistema productivo simplemente colapsaría. Lo humano también en relación con el prójimo como lo que es, próximo a mí, cercano a mí, igual a mí. Y de ahí la imprescindible igualdad y la inclusión social y también el respeto absoluto a la diversidad. Y también humanidad en nuestras relaciones, porque la proximidad no solo es métrica, también es afectiva, es cultural, es encuentro. El segundo elemento es be sustainable. Nos hemos olvidado de que las ciudades, como todo producto humano, tienen un metabolismo. La naturaleza ha evolucionado de tal manera que el desperdicio de un sistema es el alimento de otro. La naturaleza no desperdicia nada y nuestras ciudades y metrópolis deben aproximarse lo más posible a ese metabolismo natural. Nuestro sistema económico tiene que cambiar. Es insostenible y es anacrónico. No podemos seguir tratando al planeta como un mero recurso. El mundo no es de usar y tirar. El mundo no es low cost. Nuestro sistema productivo y nuestra forma de vida son materialmente expansivos, socialmente divisivos y ambientalmente hostiles e insostenibles. Y esto significa redefinir qué es prosperidad, qué es riqueza, qué es competitividad, para qué, para quién y cómo vamos a conseguirlas. Y esto va mucho más allá del PIB. Ángel Castiñeira, catedrático de 𝐒𝐸, que participaba en una de nuestras jornadas de debate recientemente, hablaba de que no hay empresas que triunfan en entornos que fracasan. Como conclusión, hacer frente a estos retos significa optimismo lúcido y crítico. Implica oportunidad y proactividad. De ahí este seminario y de ahí también la labor de Bilbao Metrópoli 30 de mirada a largo plazo y de trabajo compartido hacia ese futuro. Porque cuando hoy decimos stay human, be sustainable, lo que estamos proclamando es que sean los derechos humanos y el planeta la base sobre la que tomamos las decisiones del futuro de nuestras ciudades y nuestras metrópolis. Eta besterik gabe, orain mintegiaren irekiera instituzionalari ekingo diogu, eta horretarako gure artean dago Jonan Fernández, Eusko Jaurlaritzako transizio sozialaren eta 2030 agenda idazkari nagusia. Jonan, mesedez, nahi duzunean, zurea da hitza, txalo bero bat. Mila esker. Aurrera.
Mark Drakeford, Galesko Affairs Ministra, jauna, egunon eta ongi etorriak ere Galestik etorritako delegazio guztia, agintariok, lagunok, egunon guztioi, Idoia, mila esker, nola ez, zure hitzengatik eta Bilbao Metropoli 30 elkarteari ekitaldi hau antolatzeagatik. Ongi etorriak esan zaitezte guztiok Bilbao Metropoli 30 elkarteak antolatutako etorkizuneko metropoliei buruzko hitzaldi honetara. Aspaldikoa da Galesko herrialdearekin dugun harremana. Mar Drakeford First Ministra 2018an etorri zen, orduan Euskadira finantza ministroa zelarik. Ostean, garai hartako First Ministrarekin, 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐷𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 lehendakariak moua sinatu zuen. Edozelan ere, oraingoan Galesko First Ministra baten lehendabiziko bizita ofiziala da Euskadira. Galesek 1989 urtean bere asanblada berreskuratu zuenetik. La relación entre Euskadi y Gales se remonta años atrás, pero el hito de la relación de cooperación con Gales se produjo en julio de 2018. Firmamos entonces en Cardiff un memorando de entendimiento entre ambos territorios que nos ha permitido desarrollar distintas actividades de colaboración. El memorando fomenta la cooperación en áreas como la industria, la innovación, infraestructuras de movilidad y transporte, industria agroalimentaria, cambio climático, las energías marinas, la formación, las políticas sociales y de conciliación familiar o la fiscalidad. Esta misma mañana hemos estado reunidos y hemos comprobado que además de estos temas nos interesan y compartimos temas como los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y la Agenda 2030, el reto demográfico, las cuestiones migratorias y tantas otras. Con la firma de aquel memorando, Gales se sumó a la red de alianzas estratégicas desarrollada por Euskadi y formada por naciones y regiones líderes mundiales. También, así como para Euskadi, Gales es un socio estratégico, también lo es para Gales en su estrategia de internacionalización. Compartimos, además, el compromiso con las políticas sociales y la participación en el arco atlántico, compromiso que ayer fue refrendado en el encuentro que el primer ministro de Gales tuvo con el lehendakari. El lehendakari 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐩𝐵 está promoviendo activamente el impulso del eje atlántico, persigue, como todos ustedes saben, junto a sus socios, dotarse de una macrorregión atlántica desde la que trazar una visión estratégica conjunta. Testuinguru horretan ohore handia da gure lagun galestarrekin topaketa garrantzitsu hau partekatzea. Non metropoli gero eta bizigarriagoak eta gizatiarriagoak sustatzeko helburua partekatzen dugun. Asmo hau, goiburu izan da, barneratua gauden 3 transizioi aurre egiteko, hau da, transizio soziala, energetiko klimatikoa eta ekonomiko digitala, gure ibilbide horria, 2030 agenda da. Atzo, 2030 ikuspuntutik, igorri genuen nazio batuetara garapen jasangarrirako helburuan betetzearen 6. borondatezko jarraipen txostena. 2018an Euskadikoa izan zen aurkeztu zuen estaturik gabeko lehen gobernua. 2030 agendarekiko konpromiso horren edapena dokumentatzen du txosten honek Eusko Jaurlaritzak oro har garatutako 1700 jarduera esanguratsu baino gehiagoren balantzea laburtuaren bidez. Decía que acabamos de enviar ayer mismo el 6º informe voluntario de seguimiento del compromiso con la Agenda 2030 y por primera vez añadimos a este 6º informe un informe específico de seguimiento de la Agenda Urbana de Euskadi, un documento que tiene relación directa con todo lo que se va a tratar en este encuentro, en este seminario internacional con respecto a todo lo que tiene que ver con las áreas urbanas. Me parece importante también destacar que en la medida en que el análisis no puede ser solo local, ni Euskadi, ni Gales, ni nadie puede mirar el desarrollo de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible desde una perspectiva solo local, también debe ser global. Desde ese punto de vista, me parece importante reseñar que el lehendakari ha enviado hace unas semanas a Naciones Unidas la propuesta NOW 2030. Su objetivo es configurar 2023 como un punto de inflexión global y local en el cumplimiento de los ODS. Esta propuesta plantea que la cumbre de los ODS de septiembre en Naciones Unidas debe constituir una oportunidad que no se reduzca solo a una cumbre de jefes de Estado y de Gobierno. En 2013 estamos en el año intermedio de todo el periodo de los 15 años que proyectan la Agenda 2030 desde 2015 a 2030. Es, por tanto, un año clave, estratégico. El balance global de cumplimiento de la Agenda 2030 no es bueno. El mundo, los estados, el ámbito internacional no está cumpliendo suficientemente con los compromisos en materia de objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Por eso, en la propuesta NOW 2030, decimos que es necesario ensanchar el formato y efectos de esta cumbre de septiembre para compartir una evaluación rigurosa y autocrítica de lo que está siendo el cumplimiento con la Agenda 2030 desde 2015 hasta 2023 y con un panel de prioridades ejecutivas de 2023 a 2030. Propone en este sentido una definición de compromisos cuya premisa sea asumir que no caben dilaciones. El compromiso con los ODS es ahora o no será. 2030 es ahora. No, 2030 is now. En definitiva, el Gobierno vasco en esta propuesta solicita y ofrece un compromiso. Solicita una reacción global de compromiso firme en los años que restan de aquí a 2030 y ofrece y reivindica el papel y el compromiso de los gobiernos locales, regionales y no estatales en la localización de los ODS y su participación en una mejor gobernanza global de la Agenda 2030. Participación y gobernanza de gobiernos como el Gobierno vasco, como el Gobierno de Gales, que tenemos mucho que decir en el desarrollo y cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Gure ustez, hauxe da bidea, 2030 agenda aurrera egiteko eta metropoli atseginagoak eta humanoagoak sortzeko. Ziur nago, gaurko gogoetak emango digula horretarako aukera. Eskerrik asko.
Eskerrik asko, Jonan, por poner encima de la mesa esos retos sin dilación que tenemos y por también enfatizar el compromiso necesario de una gobernanza mundial en el avance de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. And now we are very pleased to welcome Mr. Mark Drakeford, First Minister of Wales. Good morning, Mr. First Minister. Thank you for accepting our invitation to take part in this seminar, and welcome to Bilbao. Mr. Drakeford serves as First Minister of Wales since 2018. He previously served in the Welsh Government as Cabinet Secretary for Finance and was previously Minister for Health and Social Services. He was a lecturer at the University College of Swansea and at Cardiff University, and he also was Professor of Social Policy and Applied Social Sciences at Cardiff University. As it's evident, the First Minister's academic and political career has been linked to social policies, and indeed that will be the content of his institutional presentation today at the seminar. We therefore look forward to hearing from him his vision. Thank you very much again for accepting our invitation. Cambri and Bit, long life Wales, and again, welcome to Bilbao, welcome to the Basque Country. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Wel, am y gyfellion bore da, diolch yn fawr am y cyflwyniad mor caredig na pleser mawr I fi cael y cyfle I siarad â chi I gyd bore yma. So I begin in the Welsh language simply to illustrate the fact that there are so many themes, as you have already heard this morning, which could be highlighted in addressing the theme of the seminar. The future of the metropolis, a metropolis in which we are able to be human, stay human, be sustainable and stay sustainable. And I could indeed have devoted the whole time I have in talking to you about the nature of language and its importance to us in terms of our human identity and the way in which in the Basque Country and in Wales we work together to sustain those languages, which are so important to us in our particular parts of the world as part of our identity, as part of our challenge to remain human and sustainable. I could have talked very easily to you about the challenges of the crisis in biodiversity, the challenge of climate change, and I could as well have talked about the way in which regional governments have a part to play on that wider world stage. Indeed, this is the third occasion this month that I've been lucky enough to be able to speak to an international audience. I was in Brussels on the first day of March, St. David's Day, our national day in Wales. I was in Paris last weekend and here in Bilbao today. And part of that indeed is a conscious effort on the part of the Welsh Government in what have been difficult times to go on demonstrating that for Wales, leaving the European Union is quite certainly not to stop being European. Wales is a European nation, proudly so. Our face turned outward to the world, welcoming people from Europe and beyond who have chosen to come and make their futures part of our future in Wales. So those are just three of the topics that I could have used the time I have this morning to explore with you. I've chosen instead to explore one of the fundamental challenges that face certainly Wales, I believe the Basque Country, and many other European nations. And that is the role that changing patterns of demography play in allowing us to create a future for the metropolis in which people are able to be human and sustainable. And I suppose my opening question, if there were to be a question, and if I were back in my old university job, I would be saying, I would be posing a question at the start of any seminar, and I suppose my question at the start of today's is demography destiny? In other words, are the patterns that we see in Wales and alongside so many European neighbours, are those patterns which shape our future in ways which are simply inescapable? Is the range of democratic choices available to us so narrow because of changing demography that the future has, to all intents and purposes, already been determined by our past? Now, quite certainly the demographic facts in Wales are stark. Wales has an ageing population. The percentage of our population aged over 65, 75, 85, and 95 are all on a sharply upward path. And in Wales, we have a reducing population of young people. In 10 years' time, there will be thousands fewer young people in our schools than there are today. And over the last decade, while the population of Wales has grown modestly, that growth is very unevenly distributed across our nation. Urban centres are growing, while rural parts of Wales, the parts of Wales where the Welsh language is strongest and most often spoken in daily life, those parts of Wales are seeing their populations falling. Now, all these patterns, I believe, place us in the European mainstream. The population of Italy fell by 1 million people in the last 12 months alone. And that is the 10th year in a row that the population of Italy has fallen. These are very dramatic population and demographic facts, and I'm certainly not here this morning to argue that these matters are not serious and have to be the object of public policy. But what I am going to attempt to do is to live up to the challenge that was set in the opening contribution, and that is to attempt to be not simply lucid, but optimistic as well. I want to begin by saying that I believe that it is an obligation of political leaders and of thought leaders in the face of major changes in our society, not simply to settle for the politics of despair, the sort of determinism that leads us either to bury our heads in our hands or leaves us prey to the simplistic solutions of authoritarian populists, always looking not for solutions, but for somebody else to blame. It's the responsibility of political leaders to offer our populations hope that the challenges we face, whether that is in climate change or whether it is in demography, a hope that there are solutions which lie within our grasp, which may not eradicate those problems completely, but can make a significant difference. Because unless you are able to approach policy making in that lucid and optimistic way, then populations lose faith in the capacity of us collectively to make a difference which needs to be made in their lives, and then they stop to make the contribution which only they can make and on which the rest of us rely. So what are the elements of a more successful recipe that we might be able to offer from a Welsh perspective? Well, I want to offer you just 4 threads, strands in such a recipe. And the first 2 rest very heavily on the first part of the theme of the seminar, the human theme, because in an era of demographic challenge, our first responsibility has to be to make the maximum use we can of the human capital and the human resources we have already available to us. Now, I said earlier that we have both an aging population and a falling number of young people. Well, how do we address both of those? Well, as far as older people are concerned, it really does rest upon a reorientation of the way that we conceptualize the role of older people in our society. And in particular, it means a move away from regarding older people as a problem to be solved through public policy, and instead to recognize them as an asset in the business of finding solutions. A strengths analysis quickly reveals that our older people in our population offer a huge pool of skills, experience, and economic potential. And in Wales, we aim to capture that potential through our active aging strategies. Strategies which look to position older people not as the benign object of other people's concern, but as the people they are, people who animate so many aspects of our society already, and who, given the right opportunities and the right policy contexts, are capable of going on being economic actors for much longer than they do today. Now, this is not a suggestion simply for those controversial things, as we see in France today, of extending retirement ages. This is not a strategy that relies on very blunt instruments of that sort. It seeks to recognize that later on in life, people's economic contribution will have to be captured in very different ways. So to give you 3 examples of that, first of all, we know that older people who have left the workforce may be willing to return to it, provided the basis on which they return is a good deal more flexible than the circumstances in which they left. People are not going to return to work for 35 or 40 hours a week, but they may be prepared to return to work for 10 hours a week. And, in Wales, we have some success, for example, in persuading doctors who have retired from full-time work, but who still want to make a contribution, who still feel that they have skills and knowledge and experience that they can put to work, and are prepared to return on that far more flexible basis to go on making that contribution for longer. It's also the case, we find, that when older people return to the workplace, they do not wish to resume the level of responsibility which their careers had reached when they retired. So again, to give you that example from general practitioners, doctors working in the community, by the time you reach an age when you step back from full-time work, you have probably reached the pinnacle of your career. You are leading the team of people in your practice. If you return, it will not be to resume responsibility at that level. People wish to return to the workplace, but in a capacity which allows them to focus on direct, face-to-face, frontline work rather than the managerial responsibilities which people often accumulate as they make their way up a career ladder. So flexibility, not simply in terms of hours worked, but in the sort of responsibilities that you will exercise. And thirdly, we have to, we believe, learn the positive lessons that are there to be derived from the very difficult experience of the COVID pandemic. The government that I lead, 3/4 of the people who work for the Welsh Government on any one day will now be working remotely from home or in small offices much closer to where they live. And if we are to persuade older people to become active economic actors for longer, then we have to capture those different ways of working so that we're not expecting people to make long and difficult journeys from where they live to the centre of a city alongside thousands of other people attempting to do the same thing at the same time. There are some very positive things that we have learnt from the ways in which people can go on making economic contributions that can be done in a way that is more consistent with the other things that people later in life will be looking to manage, looking to enjoy in their lives. In other words, while we have an aging population, we should not for a moment accept the idea that those people cannot be part of our economic futures in that very positive and contributing way, and there is a lot more that we can do to make those contributions both human and sustainable. I said in opening that we have a falling number of younger people in our population. Now, I sometimes think that the single greatest change in my political lifetime has been this, that for almost the whole time that I've been involved in politics, we thought that one of the greatest challenges we faced was to find work for young people to do. We thought that the shortage in our society would be work, and that the job of government was to create opportunities for young people in education, in volunteering, in the workplace, to make sure that there was activity, meaningful activity for young people. Well, today, the problem in the economy in Wales is not a shortage of work, it is a shortage of workers. And this, I think, means we have to think very differently about our young people. The excess of young people, of workers more generally, has been at the heart of growing inequality in Western societies. It gave the neoliberals the latitude to drive down wages and to discard young people as unnecessary in a globalized economy. Now, those of us who believe in more equal societies have an opportunity to deploy scarcity to drive up value. The value we attach to all our young people, and especially to those who, left to market forces, find themselves driven to the edge of our economy. So young people in the next decade are going to be amongst the most valuable people we have, and we cannot afford to waste the contribution that a single young person in our society would be prepared to make. And I want to give you just one example this time of the way in which we are trying to make a difference in that area. As in the Basque Country, we have children who cannot be looked after by their own families. They are taken into the care of the state, most often looked after by social services at a local authority level. We know that the outcomes later in life for those young people are likely to be very poor. They are very often to be found amongst the social casualties of Welsh society. They end up disproportionately in the prison population. They end up disproportionately in people who suffer from difficulties of mental health. How can we break that cycle in a way that allows those young people to be active economic actors at a time of demographic change? Well, we are mounting the single biggest experiment in universal basic income anywhere in the world. Over 2 years, every single young person who leaves the care of a local authority in Wales will be provided with a basic income, unconditionally, set at the level of the real living wage. So compared to most universal basic income experiments at the generous end of the spectrum. And the policy theory is that with that sort of start to their more independent lives, they will be able to craft for themselves successful futures. They will be able to invest in the sorts of decisions that create a chain of accountability and achievability from where they are today to where they themselves would want to be tomorrow. Now, this experiment, this 2-year experiment, is nearly 1 year old. What are we finding so far amongst those young people who have been given this weekly significant income? Because we could have found, couldn't we, that it was all just one fantastic party in which people took the money and invested it in having a very good time. In fact, what we find is that those young people make investment decisions. They spend the money on things that they think give them better chances of succeeding in future. So they use the money to put down a deposit on a flat so they've got somewhere decent to live. They use the money to enable them to go on a course in a training college which will give them the skills and qualifications that they will need in future. They use the money to pay for driving lessons. It's probably the single biggest use of the money, so that you are mobile in order to be able to take up an offer of a job that otherwise would be denied to you. In other words, offered an opportunity that was otherwise available to them, it is possible, I believe, to use the demographic challenge that we face to maximize the contribution of every young person, because when people are short, those people are valuable, and it is a responsibility of the state to allow those young people to maximize their chances of shaping their own futures successfully, but also to make their contribution to the wider good of us all. Two more practical ways in which I believe governments looking for that more optimistic future have to act in order to respond positively to the demographic challenge. We have to make the workplace itself more attractive. We certainly have to make it more available to women, and that is by remote working, by proper childcare policies, by affordable housing, by making sure that travel patterns of the future are not simply consistent with what people have grown to expect, but are consistent with the challenges of a planet that is both fragile and in need of care. So all of those things lie in the hands, in Wales, of the regional government, the Welsh government. All of those are things which we can do to make sure that the economic impact of demography is mitigated by making the opportunities for people to be in the workplace more easily available. And my final thread in all of this, and this is a more challenging thread, certainly in the United Kingdom, is that I believe the demographic challenge that we face in Wales, that an aspect of that has to be to make sure that we have a more open economy, an economy that welcomes people from other parts of the world, an economy that is not based on repelling people whose lives have been so challenging in their own part of the world that they seek refugee, asylum, or sanctuary in Wales. We have an ambition as a government to be a nation of sanctuary, in which we reach out in that positive way to people whose lives have been disrupted in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Hong Kong, and of course in Ukraine, where we have some thousands of Ukrainian citizens who now live in Wales. All of those people bring with them talents. All of those people bring with them ambitions. They are all people who we are privileged, I believe, to have amongst us as fellow citizens of Wales. And that fourth strand in how economies like the Basque economy, like the Welsh economy, respond to demographic challenges has to be in communicating that message more widely to the world, that we wish to be open and welcoming, and where necessary, to offer a sense of sanctuary to those whose lives have been made so difficult elsewhere. I wanted to emphasize that fourth point because it brings me to the final theme of this brief presentation. I'm here, Wales is here, because the answers to those challenges of the metropolis of the future quite certainly cannot be found in any one place alone. And while I've suggested some of the answers that we are pursuing in Wales, then I come to the Basque country as I go elsewhere, far more interested in learning than I am in teaching. We need an alliance of like-minded, progressive governments willing to experiment, to innovate, to share, and to cooperate. And the purpose of being here with our friends in the Basque country is to do just that. To foster those alliances amongst like-minded people facing common challenges, but whose approach to them rests in that social democratic progressive traditions in which we recognize that the solutions that reach deepest into the lives of our fellow citizens, and particularly solutions that dig deepest into the lives of those who need those solutions the most, are solutions that are based not on competition, but on cooperation, collaboration, and collective solutions for the benefit of individual citizens. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to have discussed some of those matters here today as we work together to find ways of addressing those common challenges in the metropolis, and particularly solutions that live up to what you see on the screen alongside me. Solutions that emphasize our common humanity. Solutions that allow us to create futures that are genuinely sustainable, not simply for the powerful or the privileged or those who already possess many assets in the world, but particularly for those of our fellow citizens who, without that collective effort, will always find themselves at the marginal end of what society has to offer, and for whom, if we don't find different ways of proceeding, sustainability will always be a goal that lies beyond their reach and is the privilege enjoyed by others. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. First Minister. Muchas gracias por esa mirada humana y sostenible sobre los retos que afrontan nuestras ciudades y nuestras metrópolis, y también ese optimismo responsable de hacerles frente. Y ya sin más dilación vamos a comenzar la primera sesión de debate. Me voy a acercar aquí y le voy a pedir a Asier Aranbarri mesedes, a 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐩𝐨𝐿 mesedes. Asier mesedes, mila esker. Asier da Eusko Jaurlaritzako Berrikuntza Sozialaren zuzendaria, hasiko gara zurekin. Bueno, en Euskadi las instituciones públicas, fundamentalmente Eusko Jaurlaritza, está trabajando adherida a la Agenda 2030 global, y estáis impulsando iniciativas como la Agenda Euskadi Basque Country 2030, etc. Me gustaría que compartieras, Asier, la necesidad y la oportunidad de ese acercamiento que estáis desarrollando desde el Gobierno para aproximar los retos de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible a Euskadi.
Oso, eskerrik asko, Idoia, Borda, Koiso, First Minister. Eskerrik asko gonbidapenagatik. Bai, gure saiakera da hurbiltzea, 2030 agenda hurbiltzea Euskadira, eta hurbiltzea bereziki herritarrei. Ze herritarrerik gabe ez dago 2030 agendarik. La Agenda 2030 o los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible trabajan sobre 5 ámbitos: las personas, la prosperidad, el planeta, obviamente, la paz. Y el quinto ámbito es un ámbito para nosotros esencial, que es el partnership, que son las alianzas. O sea, al final, una Agenda 2030 tiene que será, mejor dicho, transformadora si es capaz de generar buenas alianzas a todos los niveles. Y en ese sentido, cuando hablamos de acercar los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, la Agenda 2030 de Euskadi, es fundamental generar buenas alianzas a nivel internacional. De ello han hablado tanto Joana Fernández como el First Minister galés. Y ese tema es fundamental. O sea, al final, una de las principales razones para que el secretario local de la Agenda 2030 se ubique aquí en Bilbao, en Euskadi, es precisamente que las Naciones Unidas valoran de una forma notoria el sistema de gobernanza del cual nos hemos dotado. Un sistema de gobernanza que trata de alinear los esfuerzos interinstitucionales, que trata de aglutinar también a la sociedad civil organizada en todo lo que es la Agenda 2030, y trata particularmente de poner el foco en la ciudadanía en su conjunto, porque tal como decía antes, no hay Agenda 2030 sin que esa ciudadanía de la que todos formamos parte se sienta realmente interpelada. Los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible no serán objetivos de desarrollo y en definitiva no pondremos trabajar esa hoja de ruta en torno a lo que es la Agenda 2030 y el cumplimiento de los objetivos si todos y cada uno de nosotros nos sentimos realmente interpelados para que podamos avanzar en esa línea.
Eskerrik asko, Asier. Voy a dar paso, si os parece, a nuestro ponente internacional. Espero que esté conectándose en este momento. Él es David Clapp, Chair of the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales. Él, lamentablemente, no va a poder estar en persona con nosotros, pero yo creo que se encuentra en algún lugar detrás de esta pantalla. Sí, creo que se está conectando en este momento, por lo que me están diciendo. En unos momentos se va a conectar. Te agradezco, Asier, que hayas puesto el foco, entre tanto, en esa importancia de las alianzas,
sí,
¿no? Y en esa responsabilidad colectiva que tenemos para compartir. De alguna manera, siento que Bilbao Metrópoli 30, nuestra asociación que vincula esos esfuerzos públicos y privados, de alguna manera pues se parece a ese esfuerzo que estáis impulsando y también tenemos en común esa mirada a largo plazo, porque aunque cada vez es más urgente de alguna manera responder a esos retos que tenemos sobre la mesa, no deja de ser una mirada también a largo plazo.
Sí,
no sé si quieres aportar
sí,
alguna cosa
a mí
mientras...
justo en la conversación previa que hemos tenido con los amigos de Gales me ha llamado poderosamente la atención, lo conocíamos, pero hoy hemos podido hablar de ello. Tienen aprobado una ley que llaman la Ley de Generaciones Futuras y al final, gracias a esa ley, tienen que medir el impacto de todo lo que hacen con la mirada puesta en el futuro. Al final, tratan de medir la repercusión de las decisiones que van tomando en las futuras generaciones. Y entiendo que es una referencia muy, muy interesante también para nosotros. Los que estamos en la política en muchas ocasiones miramos al titular del día siguiente, única y exclusivamente, y es fundamental tener esa mirada a medio o largo plazo, porque con esa mirada a medio y largo plazo pensamos en las siguientes generaciones, en los 5 ámbitos que he comentado antes, en el de las personas, en el de la prosperidad, en el del planeta y en el de la paz, y esa mirada a medio y largo plazo es fundamental para poder acertar en el corto. Por tanto, en ese sentido, a partir de esas alianzas generadas entre todas las partes, entre la parte pública y la parte privada, con esa mirada también en lo que es el foco internacional, buscando también partners interesantes que nos ayudan a aprender y tejer un camino conjunto y tener siempre esa mirada a medio y largo plazo, pensando particularmente en las siguientes generaciones. Creo que es un aprendizaje realmente importante en el cual tenemos todavía mucho que hacer.
Es que ricasco, Asier. Creo que ya me dicen que sí, que el doctor Clapp. Good morning, David. How are you?
Hola, buenos días. Muy bien, gracias.
Thank you very much for taking part in this seminar. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Okay.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
Okay. La primera pregunta que quiero formularte, David, tiene que ver con la misión que tiene la Comisión de conseguir objetivos de largo plazo que mejoren la vida de la ciudadanía galesa, apoyando en este caso al Gobierno de Gales. Me gustaría que compartieras inicialmente cómo desarrolláis vuestra misión, cómo hacéis frente a ese reto.
So I think that's a way of introduction for me to start talking about my experiences with the Infrastructure Commission in Wales.
Oh.
And I would like to start with just a very brief story about my own experience with the Basque Country, where I had the pleasure of cycling the Camino de Santiago and went through the Basque Country and cycled with 5 young Basque men and had an amazing time. They were incredibly generous, very warm-hearted, and I've always carried that vision of the people from the Basque Country as being a very, very warm, embracing, and a generous people. And that's why I'm really happy today to be able to contribute a very small amount back to this conference, because I will always share that memory with great pleasure. I'm going to share my presentation. Bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, perfect.
So I hope you can see that. I'm going to talk now about how infrastructure and society and concepts around frameworks are very important for us in Wales about infrastructure. So in particular, my interest is in how an infrastructure commission with a very small amount of resource can provide some quite interesting concepts to help people think and understand infrastructure in different ways. So the first slide here is a picture of 6 out of the 8 commissioners. And very simply, we exist to provide advice on the infrastructure that Wales needs. The Infrastructure Commission itself has been in existence for about 6 years. It started in 2018, and the remit was pretty clear. There was a very strong focus on the economy, and the time horizon for the discussions of that commission were 30 years into the future. We have a very different commission now, and the remit has been changed quite significantly. So the emphasis for us in this commission is on the socio and the environment. And also I requested that we change the time horizon out to 80 years in the future. So this socio-environment focus is driven by several things which are a key part of Welsh Government policy, policies which I would add have been embraced by civil society. So the first one of those is the nature emergency, which was announced by the Senedd and agreed by Welsh Government. And the second is the climate emergency. So both of these are very strong drivers for what we do. And the time horizon of 80 years is really looking at something which is more realistic when we're talking about infrastructure than 30 years. And I think an 80-year time horizon is more reasonable when we are trying to imagine what the very long-term impacts of climate change will be. So 30 years doesn't really allow us to imagine some of the very severe impacts from sea level rise, drought, and other things. And 80 years, I think, allows us to plan a bit more effectively. So when we think about infrastructure, certainly through the Infrastructure Commission, we are really thinking from the perspective, we're trying to imagine the perspective of somebody being born in 2103. And that perspective is really interesting and important for us in our deliberations. So I believe that the perspective we hold should determine, or does determine, the response that we make. And I'm afraid to say that in general, the infrastructure sector, certainly historically, perhaps that's changing now, has been driven by a perspective of white men in general. And therefore, the response of infrastructure has been to provide services that are shaped through that vision. And we believe that that needs to change. So when we consider infrastructure, we need to imagine and we need to ask about the needs of people who are not able-bodied, the very young, the old in society, people who have different social views, whether that's because of religion or because they choose to live their lives in different ways. And each of these sectors, as Mark said earlier, is not somebody to be benign to, but they bring strengths and they bring perspectives to us which we can't otherwise imagine. And by trying to consider the needs of all different users in society, infrastructure will deliver better outcomes for everybody. By applying these thoughts about considering the needs of everybody, we know that we can better serve the needs of social justice. And we will also better serve the needs of intergenerational justice. And in general, when people discuss justice, they tend to focus on social justice because those inequalities are right in front of us. But we must also try to remind ourselves about intergenerational inequality, because that is something that is very real. It's just harder for us to imagine. So in all of our discussions, we keep saying 2100. What will those children think of the discussions that we have today? So how do we get from this white male perspective to a more interesting, rounded perspective? Well, we think that something about the team composition is quite important. So the makeup of our Infrastructure Commission is much more representative of the population of Wales than previous Infrastructure Commissions. And we're also quite interested in the role that behavioural science can play in telling us how people will choose to interact with their infrastructure. There's lots of help out there for people who are interested in cities, city planning, and how to incorporate aspects of supporting different user groups. We were interested to see that there's a Scottish city has planned to become the UK's first feminist city improving lighting, walkability, and public services. There's also the International National Park City Foundation, which has a number of different aspiring cities and existing cities as part of its movement, and that aims to bring biodiversity into our cities and to bring the concept of a national park within urban environments. There are good practice guides out there on building age-ready cities, on making cities child-friendly, and on providing inclusive infrastructure. So these challenges, and they are significant challenges, particularly with the urban environment, there are resources to help us come to terms with some of the concepts that might be useful. So when we think about how an infrastructure is interacting with our partners, we need to use some frameworks to help us deliver, change our thinking, and how do we incorporate that into practical outputs. So we have a number of different frameworks through which we operate. We consider the nature emergency, the climate emergency. In Wales, we have an act called the Wellbeing of Future Generations. We think very long term, and we're aware of the socio-economic duty, which means that we want to see equality of outcome for all of the citizens of Wales. And we also are aware that there may be additional frameworks that could be helpful, so we keep that under review. If we deal with the nature emergency, the climate emergency, if we think long term and we think about the needs of the poorest in society, we will deliver that equality of outcome. And through the well-being of future generations, there is also another 7 aspects through which we can consider, and I won't go into each of these, but 2 parts of our framework help us to consider the outcomes of infrastructure which can deliver the sort of outcomes for the future that Wales wants and needs. So if we consider how cities can be built, taking on the needs of young people, of old people, and of inclusive infrastructure, we will comply with our need for the well-being of future generations and our socio-economic duty. If we build in plans to make cities more female-friendly, we can improve our delivery of those things. If we incorporate national park city ideas, we can support the nature emergency and the climate emergency. And there will be other frameworks which can help with this. We heard from the First Minister of Wales earlier, and I would say that we need radical policies because business as usual has been hopeless in delivering what we need in a climate-friendly and a nature-friendly way, and in a way that serves all of the population. And in a couple of years ago, there was a big debate in Wales about expanding the principal motorway. When the First Minister came in, he made the decision not to expand that motorway. And this was the first sign to me in 2 decades of devolution that Wales was doing something which was quite different to the rest of the UK, and in principle quite different, I think, to other places in Europe. That radicalism was continued with the recent publication of the Roads Review, where most of the roads that had been proposed, new roads, had been proposed in Wales, were analysed, and it was determined that many of them would not proceed, and the ones which were going to proceed would be changed. These sorts of radical thinking is absolutely necessary if we're going to build livable cities and if we're going to fulfil our obligations to future generations. So I'm going to talk very briefly about our aspirations internally for the Infrastructure Commission. We had the first 3 years of the Infrastructure Commission, and then the second 3 years, of which I was appointed in late 2021. We're doing work this year on renewable energy. Next year, we'll be working on trying to understand how we can reduce the impact of flooding in Wales. And in the final year, we are likely to look at some of the more existential risks from climate change, including sea level rise, and how we have that discussion with coastal communities about whether their communities will be viable in 80 years' time. And that's when the end of my term comes up. But I also wanted to talk about the values, because how we operate as a commission is determined by the values that we hold. And this is very much a work in progress. But one of the things that we're very keen on is transparency. How do we hold our discussions? Who are we talking to? And we have taken some interesting steps, I think, in trying to help people understand what we do on a daily basis. We have something called a digital garden, which is an online resource that you can go to and find out on any given day of the year who we have talked to and the sorts of discussions we're having. So if you click on the 8th of March for 2023, you can see that we attended a group meeting and we have published the interviews of that meeting. I believe that transparency is absolutely critical in good governance, and I'm determined to try and use this role to show what the art of the possible is in using free open source software and opening the doors of the Commission so that everybody is welcome to see what we're doing and everybody is welcome to contribute their ideas. There was some mention about partnerships, and of course we can't do this alone. We have talked to many, many people, and again, the record of these meetings is all available on the website. And it's actually through the soft power of those partnerships that we're able to carry out so much activity. We can do very little with our own resource, so we're trying to leverage the skills of our many partners. And we're also very keen on using open source social media as a way to reduce the barriers for participation and public participation in discourse and conversation around infrastructure. We are also very interested in the concept of inner development goals. In other words, how we think. The claim has been made that the biggest problems in the world are not climate change and the nature emergency, but it's selfishness and greed and a lack of empathy and understanding. And so that's why we're really interested about how we think and how we interact internally and externally. So we're currently doing work on how we act within the Infrastructure Commission. So that's something about how we think and how we operate, and it is definitely a work in progress. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Tu exposición me ha parecido un magnífico ejemplo de uno de los paradigmas de Bilbao Metrópoli 30 que habla de la evolución de infraestructuras a valores. Y en vuestra comisión, aunque en su título aparece la palabra infraestructuras, evidentemente muchos de los proyectos que impulsáis son de valores. Por respetar los tiempos, solo os voy a pedir casi una misión imposible a ambos, que sería sintetizar en una palabra o en una frase para poder despedirnos a -4 puntualmente, que sintetice de qué manera podemos avanzar en esa responsabilidad colectiva de los proyectos que estáis impulsando. Si hubiera que buscar una palanca mágica que ayudara a movilizar esos proyectos hacia el futuro, ¿cuál debería ser en vuestra opinión? Si os parece, le cedo la palabra a Sier inicialmente para esa palabra, frase mágica, después a David, y si os parece cerramos aquí la sesión.
Pues yo subrayaría particularmente la palabra transformación. O sea, creer que podemos realmente cambiar las cosas y a partir de esas alianzas público-privadas tener los valores sobre los cuales queremos transitar bien claros, bien compartidos, y a partir de ahí, sobre una gobernanza bien elaborada, ser conscientes de que las cosas se pueden transformar y se pueden cambiar. No hay más que ver los 40 años de desarrollo que ha tenido este país, los 40 años de desarrollo que ha tenido Bilbao, particularmente la labor de Bilbao Metrópoli 30 en todos esos años. No tiene nada que ver el Bilbao de hace 40 años con el Bilbao de hoy en día, y eso es porque en su momento la gente tuvo esa visión, supieron aunar esfuerzos y trabajar todos en la misma dirección. Por tanto, yo sobre todo subrayaría que una de las palancas fundamentales para cambiar las cosas es tener precisamente ese carácter transformador y que si se quiere, se puede.
Eskerrik asko, Asier. It's your turn. David, what's your sentence, your advice?
Would you mind just repeating the question?
Yeah, I was asking about a final sentence or just one word to help us move all these projects forward. What do you think is the magical recipe for that?
I will repeat my idea that the long term has to be at the key of all of these decisions. And it's really interesting for me that when I think about discussions we've had and decisions that have been made, we would often have made different ones if we had had the people from 2100 sitting in the room with us and giving their opinion about the world that they inhabit. So the very long term is an incredibly valuable tool in decision making.
Ok, pues yo creo que misión cumplida. Con transformación y largo plazo nos vamos a despedir en este momento. Tenemos ahora un coffee break para descansar y networking y si os parece retornamos a 15:15 para empezar puntualmente. Eskerrik asko, mila esker. Y bueno, sin más dilación vamos a comenzar entonces esta segunda sesión de debate que tiene como título Espacios urbanos afrontando los retos de la sostenibilidad. Y para este tema contamos con dos ponentes magníficos. Por un lado tenemos a Alexander Boto, director general de 𝐿𝐿, economista ambiental de formación, y por otro lado Hélène Chartier, directora de diseño y desarrollo urbano de la red C40. Voy a comenzar contigo, Alex, si te parece. Desde 𝐿𝐿 estáis impulsando proyectos e iniciativas que están alineadas con el Pacto Verde Europeo. ¿Cómo aunáis sostenibilidad y espacio urbano? ¿Y qué esfuerzos estáis haciendo para pasar a la acción, de alguna manera?
Bueno, lehenengo eta behin eskerrik asko gonbidatzeagatik, eskerrik asko Bilbao Metrópoli 30, placer handia. Si puedo, me ha parecido muy interesante la presentación del primer ministro de Gales y hemos estado ahora comentando con Asier la importancia de la reflexión del futuro. Si me permitís, me pongo de pie porque tengo para comentar un poco algunos de los temas que hoy se han comentado. Cuando el primer ministro de Gales hablaba de la ley de generaciones futuras, ha dicho una palabra que es bienestar, ley de bienestar de generaciones futuras. Y yo creo que uno de los dilemas que tenemos de incorporar la variable futura es cómo definimos bienestar, prosperidad también se ha estado hablando, economía, medio ambiente, bueno, todo esto cómo se mide, ¿no? Y es verdad, el corto plazo suele ser uno de las variables, pues tanto de la política como de la economía. Los economistas medimos mucho el PIB, incluso yo creo que mensualmente sabemos cómo va el crecimiento, pero no sabemos medir muy bien el bienestar y la prosperidad, y esto cambia bastante. Y sobre todo en medio ambiente los tiempos no son los de la economía, no podemos medir la biodiversidad mensualmente, la tenemos que medir a muy largo plazo. Y voy a poner un ejemplo que me parece, en la foto que está aquí, no sé si conocéis en la metrópoli, lógicamente, de Bilbao, en 1977, esta fue la primera vez en todo el Estado que el gobierno español declaró zona contaminada atmosférica. Yo creo que esa es. Y mirar ahora la realidad 40 años después, la realidad es que 9 de cada 10 días en Euskadi tenemos buena calidad del aire. O sea, el 90% hace 40 años de los ríos los teníamos en rojo, contaminados. Y eso ha cambiado totalmente, yo creo que es visible, ¿no? Entonces, esta gráfica para mí es muy importante, cómo los economistas miden la actividad económica, que ahí sabéis PIB, pero no sabemos medir muy bien el bienestar. Y luego, sobre todo, lo que tenemos que intentar es reducir las presiones y los impactos ambientales. Esta es una gráfica que a mí me parece muy importante porque en el tiempo cada línea se mide de una forma y le hemos dado mucha importancia a la prosperidad o a la variable económica y se nos ha olvidado un poco cuál es el objetivo y cómo medir la prosperidad o el bienestar. 45%, ¿alguien sabe un poco qué es esta cifra? ¿Alguien le recuerda algo? ¿Os suena algo esta cifra? Bueno, pues 45% sería lo que la ciencia dice y el objetivo que nos hemos marcado en el Acuerdo de París para reducir a nivel del planeta las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero al año 2030. Esto es lo que tendríamos que reducir, el 45%, para no sobrepasar los 2 grados de la era preindustrial, ¿no? Tendríamos que reducir el 45% a nivel del planeta. Pero es el mismo objetivo que Euskadi nos hemos marcado al año 2030 de reducción de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, de CO2. Es un objetivo muy ambicioso. Difícil, vamos en la buena senda, luego os lo enseñaré, pero hay que seguir acelerando. Y también es otro 45%, habréis oído hablar de la economía circular, y la economía circular, es decir, el consumo de recursos de materias primas, impacta en el CO2 en el 45%. Es decir, el 45% de todas las emisiones se pueden reducir con una gestión adecuada de la economía circular o de la reducción del consumo de materias primas. Sobre el cambio climático, yo creo que esto va a ser importante porque la migración, los movimientos migratorios, pues yo creo que el día de ayer, todos antes estábamos comentando con Helen, el día de ayer fue ya en marzo, casi 30 grados en Bilbao. Bueno, pues esto está, yo creo que ya es evidente, la ciencia nos lo decía, pero esto se va a producir, esto va a cambiar, se va a transformar. La palabra transformación me parece muy importante. Temperatura eta itsas-mailaren igoera, aldaketa prezipitazio sisteman, bueno, esto ya se está viviendo. Esta no era la foto de ayer, pero casi la podemos utilizar como foto de ayer. Y esto es muy importante porque nos tenemos que adaptar. Y en Euskadi estamos haciendo un ejercicio muy importante de adaptación. Pero cuando antes hablaba de emisiones y de PIB y de emisiones, yo os voy a dar algunos de los datos muy sencillos, pero el PIB en Euskadi desde el año 2000 va creciendo y nuestras emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero se van reduciendo. Luego alguno me dirá que igual es porque estamos transfiriendo nuestras emisiones de CO2 a otros países. Esto es medir esto es complicado, pero bueno, os puedo decir que esto es así y que el impacto neto estamos reduciendo y estamos consiguiendo reducir nuestras emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero. Pero lo mismo me pasa como con las emisiones de partículas PM10, no sé si conocéis temas de calidad del aire, este es el indicador por excelencia, las partículas pues también se están reduciendo. Lo mismo que antes os comentaba con las materias primas, esto es todo lo que está ligado a la economía circular. Nosotros, Euskadi, Europa, tiene un problema de materias primas. Somos el 75% de nuestro consumo de materias primas las importamos. Entonces, bueno, pues no tenemos grandes recursos en materias primas y es muy importante reducir este consumo e intentar seguir creciendo. Porque cuando antes hablaba Idoia del Pacto Verde Europeo, no olvidemos que el Pacto Verde Europeo, aunque tenga el adjetivo de verde, es una estrategia de competitividad y unir la competitividad, la economía con el medio ambiente. Esto es importante. Lo mismo podría hablar de los residuos. Y ahora ya quería bajar ya algún ejemplo también muy rápido de cómo estamos haciendo esta transición energético-climática en Euskadi, ya para bajar a ejemplos concretos de detalle. Tenemos más de 55 municipios que están han hecho sus inventarios de gases de efecto invernadero, sus planes de transición energético y climática. O sea, hay un movimiento importante a nivel municipal. Lógicamente, las grandes ciudades lo están llevando con más recursos, pero también a nivel de municipios más pequeños, pues también se pueden incorporar. Yo os he traído 3 ejemplos de uno de los instrumentos que se están incorporando cada vez en mayor medida, ¿no? Que es las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y la adaptación al cambio climático. Bueno, aquí tenéis un ejemplo de Vitoria, pero tenemos otros de Donostia, San Sebastián, que también se está haciendo pues, todo lo que es soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. La parte de biodiversidad urbana cada vez va a ser más importante, porque siempre hemos pensado la biodiversidad en clave de lo que es fuera de las urbes, pero cada vez se está dando más importancia también a lo que es la biodiversidad dentro de las metrópolis. Y este sería el caso de Zorrozaurre o de Bilbao, ¿no? Que también se está trabajando en la regeneración de la transformación de toda esa península y con unos criterios de sostenibilidad muy importantes, incluso de adaptación al cambio climático por las subidas del mar. Porque no olvidar que Euskadi tiene gran población en la costa y la subida del nivel del mar, que se está hablando con una perspectiva a largo plazo del año 2100, de incrementos del nivel del mar entre 0,5 y 1 metros, lo cual significa también que tenemos que adaptarnos a esta nueva realidad. Y ya únicamente, bueno, para que tengáis algunos otros ejemplos de municipios que están haciendo todo lo que es la actividad de transición energético-climática. Estos se lo están tomando muy en serio, además con los temas energéticos en estos momentos. Bueno, pues hay un gran movimiento. Y quería terminar la presentación con una red, porque al final siempre, antes también se comentaba, la cooperación ligado a la Agenda 2030 es fundamental. Tener el marco de la Agenda 2030 es fundamental. Y tenemos esta red vasca de municipios sostenibles que en estos momentos, si no me equivoco, a ver si tengo el dato, creo que son 210 municipios vascos adheridos a esta red, pero todavía más importante, 22 entidades comarcales que el año pasado, por vez primera, entraron a formar parte de la red. No es una colaboración público-privada, es colaboración público-pública, porque es gobierno, diputaciones, agencias de desarrollo, mancomunidades, etcétera, y ayuntamientos, porque todavía luego podríamos hablar del tema de financiación, no están las empresas privadas, ha habido algunos intereses en entrar, pero por ahora estamos viendo cómo impregnar todo lo que es la sostenibilidad. Me da igual si es desde el punto de vista ambiental, social, cultural. Hay gente que está trabajando temas de igualdad, euskera. O sea, es muy importante todo esto. Y esta red lo que hace es colaborar. Por ahora, público-público. Yo creo que esta era la breve presentación que quería haceros para enmarcar la pregunta.
Bueno, le damos un aplauso a Alex, por favor. Luego tendremos más ocasión de profundizar. Gracias por esta radiografía de los datos y de algunos proyectos que estáis impulsando desde 𝐒𝐿 y bueno, por poner el foco en esa colaboración público-público, que desde luego no es nada desdeñable, y en esa transversalidad de los temas medioambientales. Vamos a escuchar ahora a 𝐒𝐿𝐻. Yo te voy a hacer una primera pregunta, 𝐒𝐿𝐻, breve, sobre la red C40 y la importancia de esa colaboración entre alcaldes y alcaldesas de todo el mundo para hacer frente al cambio climático. Inicialmente, ¿nos puedes compartir algunas pinceladas sobre el objetivo de esa red, en qué trabaja, por qué ha nacido?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I don't speak Basque and I don't speak Spanish, but I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much, Idoia, for inviting me. So yes, maybe just let me just explain who we are. So we are, sometimes I say we are the UN of cities working on climate change, just to make it easy. So it's basically a network of cities who has been created 20 years ago, approximately, first as a network of mayors discussing together and saying, oh, the COP are failing, the national government are not accelerating their action on climate change. What are you doing in your cities? So mayors like the mayor of Copenhagen, Paris, New York start to call each other and just share what they were doing, and then the movement grow, and we are now quite a lot working not only with the mayoral level, but also with all of the administration level to try to really mainstream climate action on the different topics. So it's the chair is turning. So every 2-3 years there is a new chair. Today, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is our chair, and we are accelerating action in 100 cities approximately across the world. It is important to say that. I mean, I'm not objective there, but I think it's important to say that, and we have seen that with a little bit the disappointment of the past COP, that there is this movement of cities, local government, who is also trying, they are not part of the COP negotiation, but they are also trying to make a difference. And actually, when you look the commitments of the nation, which is based on, they need to agree on everything, and the way cities are working, try also to have some cities leading on specific topic. Oslo is leading on clean construction, Copenhagen is leading on mobility, I'm sure Monica will say that. Other cities are, in Global South are working quite hard on adaptation. So how we could have a common objective, and the common objective of the mayor of C40 is the objective of the Paris Agreement, so trying to reduce our emission by half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050, but then having some pioneer cities paving the way for others. So that's how these mayors are working together and try to accelerate action on the ground.
Es un magnífico ejemplo de cómo las ciudades tienen un rol, una responsabilidad en el cambio climático, cómo están ganando protagonismo. Me gustaría, Helen, si pudieras compartirnos proyectos, iniciativas que estáis desarrollando desde C40 que nos ayuden a visualizar un poco de manera más concreta qué iniciativas se están impulsando desde las ciudades.
Okay, so I tried to explain a little bit where mayors are acting and give a bit of a concrete example. So first, I think what is very important is that we need to focus on where the biggest GHG emissions are coming. On average, between our global networks, so leading metropolis, I would say, the buildings are still the first. Of course, from one city to another, it's different, but we say it's approximately 50% of the emissions that come from the built environment. Then the transport is 35%, and then the waste. So that's also important to mention. On building, so we know that the built environment has a huge responsibility in the climate crisis, so they need also this conversation between cities and the built environment sector to transform the way they work. And I want to give two numbers that I think very important. First, the global building floor area is expected to double by 2060. So that's the rate of the construction. So it's like every month in the world we are adding a new cities like New York. It's very important, it's striking, because we can ask ourselves, even if we build net zero, sustainable, is that sustainable to continue to build at this rate? I think it's a very important question that we need to ask together. The second thing is that at the opposite, what about the existing building stock? The existing building stock, that needs to be retrofit. Today, it's less than 1% of the building stock that is retrofit every year. So it's really, we are not retrofitting existing building, and we are continuing to build. There is two main categories of emissions that come from building. There is what we call the operational emission, which is basically the electricity, the heat that come in our house, our building. And for that, we know how to reach net zero. What we need to do is every new building needs to be built net zero operational emission. Today, the technology is here. It's easy to do it. And we need, even more importantly, to accelerate retrofit of the existing building to reduce the emissions that come from this building. That's really, and then we need to invest in renewable energy system and infrastructure. And there is a lot of examples that come from cities, because sometimes we have these ideas that the renewable energy is, in rural area, but there is a lot of cities who are also integrating renewable energy sources in the city's environment. I want to give an example. Oops. I killed Oh, no, it's back. Sorry. I think it's an example from New York, because New York, the way the building stock is in New York, we can all picture what New York looks like. The emission in New York are 70% of come from building. So all of their effort today is focusing on reducing the emissions that come from their building stock. And New York has passed 3 years ago probably one of the most ambitious policies, saying that working with all of the owner of the building stock of the cities to make them mandatory to retrofit their building. And for that, they provide technical assistance to each owner of a building, and they also provide some tax incentive to help also these to to happen. But there is a second category of emission that come from building, and that is called the embodied emission. This part of the emission, that's really the part that we have totally forgot about it for years, decades. Nobody was speaking about that. Since a few years, there is this big discussion about what about the emissions that come from the construction work, the construction itself. And now we know that it's a very important part. If you look at the emissions that come from building, there is 2/3 that come from the operational and 1/3 that come from these embodied emissions from the construction. And it is even more important because, as you can see in this diagram, which represents the whole life cycle analysis of the emission during the life of a building, you can see there is a big peak of emissions that come at the beginning of the life of a building, which means each time you build, at the beginning of the life of the building, you create a massive emission, while the operational emissions are the orange, a little bit more over the lifetime of the building. So if we are in this thinking of we are the key decade to act, there is an urgency to say, whoa, we need to stop a little bit this embodied emission. And, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing with it. Okay. So on embodied emission, what should we do? What are the objectives? First, we need to measure it. We need to be transparent. We need to push the built environment sector to measure these embodied emissions. They were not doing it before. And we need to reduce by approximately 50% for one new building the embodied emission. We don't know how to do a zero embodied emission project now. So this is also, reducing, but we cannot do. And for that, I think the first objective is to say, we need to focus on what is already there. We need to stop the circle of demolition, reconstruction that have been terrible for the environment. Then, when we build, we need to build for the future, how we can extend the lifetime of the building. We know that most of the buildings that are being demolished have no structural problem. They are demolished because the aesthetic doesn't work, the functionality doesn't work. But we could extend the life. So we need to think about this. And of course, we need also to build with low carbon materials, such as local materials, remove at the maximum concrete and steel, who are the main contributor. And to come back to the first priority, what about looking the existing built environment? In France, there is a big debate right now about, what about vacancy rate of the building. A study has shown that 8% of the housing stock in France are totally empty. And if you add the secondary housing, who are on average used 3 weeks a year, it's 18% of the housing stock of France who is totally empty or almost empty. And I'm not talking about offices, because since COVID, this is also a big debate. And in Paris, for example, today the most controversial discussion is about stopping any new construction on offices. They say, we don't know how we will work in 10 years, in 5 years. There is such a big change in the way we work, we need to stop, because we need to stop this embodied emission. Vancouver in Canada has developed a very interesting policies saying, okay, how we could reduce the vacancy rate. And they have developed what they call an empty home tax, basically taxing every building every housing that is empty in the city, because there was this empty home and at the same time a very important social housing crisis. So they say we need also to tax a little bit this. And it has been so successful that they have now tripled the taxes, and the mayor has already said, I'm going to multiply by 5 next year. So there is also this type of important policies that need to be taken. I was mentioning expanding the life of the building, the previous Pritzker Prize, Lacaton and Vassal, they are French, I'm a little bit weak. But I think it's very important. They have been really pioneer on how we could stop demolishing, but transforming, reusing, with one of the projects here in Bordeaux, who show that, this building from the 70s that nobody thinks it's interesting can be transformed to something more positive, where people see how they can live. This project, again, in France, in Paris, we are also, I was mentioning the importance of transforming the way we build if we have to build. This project is very interesting. It's going to be the first net zero neighborhood in the city of Paris. Not only they tackle operational emission, but also the embodied emission in 2 ways. only local construction materials, only bio-based construction material, hemp, wood, all of these things. And the second element, which I think is very important, all of the space are reversible. So they can be an office for 5 years and they can quickly be transformed in a housing. So by doing that, they extend the lifetime of the building. Qingdao in China is also trying to accelerate prefabrication of building, which not only reduce emission because it's less heavy materials, but also reduce pollution within the cities. But we also need to think beyond building, because it's also about the way we have organized our cities with a big problem. You were mentioning it also a little bit in your introduction. We know that after the World War II, when the cars arrived in our cities, we have totally transformed the way we were planning our cities. We move away from medium density, mixed-use cities to something which is promoting car-oriented planning, urban sprawl, over-specialization of the neighborhood with residential area separated from business district, and all of them connected by infrastructures that were built for cars. And this led basically to many of the challenges cities are facing today. Air pollution, long commute for the people, lack of amenities maybe in a lot of neighborhoods, segregation also across the cities, and consumption of natural land. And today in France, there is a national law called net zero artificialization. Basically, the government is trying to say no more urban sprawl. And believe me, the real estate sector is fighting very hard against that, and we need to support this type of action. So what is a good urban planning? We try to summarize around 3 main principles. The first one is about creating medium density, polycentric cities made of a mosaic of complete neighborhood. And I will explain a little bit what does that mean. The second thing is that we need to transform the public space to moving from a car-oriented public space to a people-centered public space. And the third element is really coming, bringing nature again in the cities. The first element, if I can explain, is about we have built cities who are totally monocentric in their organization. The mixed-use densities in the middle, and the rest is urban sprawl, over-specialization of neighborhood. We need to create a more polycentric area when in each of the complete neighborhood you have a mix of people, which means different typology of housing, a mix of use, and especially the key amenities that are needed for people to walk or to bike, and therefore you reduce emission both from the transport but also from the built environment, because you make the case for a medium density, smaller housing which create less emission. So this is the concept behind what we call sometimes the 15-minute city, but I want to be clear there. There is nothing new here. It has been developed by many thought leaders. Jane Jacob in Canada, Jan Gehl in Denmark has pushed this idea, and more recently our friend Carlos Moreno has also theorized that for Paris and other cities. The latest IPCC report of the expert on climate change that says this type of urban planning could reduce 25% of the emission by 2050. I don't know how much time I have.
We have until 12, so a couple of minutes, Hélène. Okay. It's okay for the debate after?
So I just quickly, so Paris as trying to accelerate this type of thing, and they have developed a set of key coordinated action. The first thing, they have developed a program called School Street, which is about closing the street nearby school to cars, to transform a place where people can meet after school or before school, can stay, they have playground and everything, and also reduce air pollution next to the school. They have done a second program which is called Oasis Schoolyard. The problem in Paris is built. It's built, there is no, but we have a problem with park. So they were saying, okay, how we could quickly create new park. And one of the ideas was to say, but the schoolyard are here. So they have basically invest money to transform the schoolyard to something which is more nature-based with green space. And they have opened the schoolyard after school hours, during the weekend, during the summer and everything. The mayor has also decided to remove 50% of the parking of the cities to transform them into green space or terraces for local shop. Barcelona, and I was last week in Barcelona with their Superblock, which is controversial, but is so bold. I'm saying the same, they have the same typology, different, Cerda is not Haussmann, but still, you know, about we lack of space, saying we need to transform the public space to give this space for people. And it was super inspiring to see how they are putting playground instead of car, or they are transforming the public space to give it back to the people. Vancouver is trying to integrate this vision of walkable, complete neighborhood in the recent master plan, and I'm not going to go in the detail. Last element, because I think it's very important, it's about climate adaptation and nature. We know that today, you know, we need to prepare better our city to the climate risk, and especially to urban heat island. And we know that the best solution for that is bringing back nature in cities. Removing permeable soil, because asphalt is creating so many heat, but instead let the soil and the plant breathe, use also the shadow that could create, and so there is a global movement of cities who are bringing back nature in their cities, from Houston to Paris to Barcelona to Copenhagen. All of the cities are doing the same. And this diagram is very interesting because you can see two things. First, if you compare the temperature in the city center and in the more rural area, there is a difference of temperature that sometimes in the peak of heat that could be 7 degrees. But there is hope because we still need urban life, because urban life is the most sustainable way, let's be honest. There is hope because you can see that each time you incorporate nature in the city, you can drop the temperature, and there is, and that's my last slide. Oh no, I will skip this one just to finish on this example, because Medellin in Latin America has been definitely the pioneer cities on this renaturation movement. Before all of the other cities, they have really reintroduced trees, and thanks to their experience, we have measured the difference of temperature before and after, and we have seen that it was a fantastic tool. So that's really something we need to accelerate. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène. Thank you. Bueno, en los minutos que nos quedan para este debate, la primera pregunta que quiero haceros tiene que ver con la incorporación del sector privado, porque habéis hablado de ejemplos, Alex, de esta red que está impulsando desde lo público, y Hélène también ha puesto el ejemplo de C40, una red de alcaldes y alcaldesas del mundo. ¿Cómo se involucra también a lo privado y a la ciudadanía en este reto que no deja de ser un reto compartido? ¿Cómo? Y no sé si hay algún incentivo o alguna oportunidad que conocéis o que se está implementando para aunar ese esfuerzo también privado y social a la causa pública. Alex.
Vale. Antes de
meternos en la pregunta.
Me ha gustado mucho la presentación de Hélène, y en una de las transparencias que hablaba de la parte de urbanismo, de edificación, era muy importante la fase de diseño. Cualquier producto o cualquier, en este caso un edificio, el impacto ambiental, el 80% del impacto ambiental del ciclo de vida de ese producto se determina en su fase de diseño. Entonces es muy importante, y por eso la economía circular lo que hace es, en todos los productos que queráis que fabricamos, el 80% del impacto a lo largo del ciclo de vida va a estar en la fase de diseño. Por eso la economía circular es fundamental, incluso incorporarla y se está haciendo ya en los municipios, en el urbanismo, en la planificación territorial. ¿Cómo está incorporando el mundo financiero o la empresa privada? En Euskadi, para mí es fundamental que esté el sector privado involucrado en esta ola, digamos, de transformación hacia una sostenibilidad global, ¿no? con tanto sostenibilidad económica, social y ambiental. Es el que tiene los recursos financieros y la innovación. O sea, yo creo que la administración necesita y la ciudadanía necesita del sector privado. Cuando vienen delegaciones de fuera, les llama mucho la atención nuestra política de colaboración público-privada. Eso nosotros lo tenemos casi como natural y es lo que más suelen destacar. Nosotros tenemos una política de clústeres, ya con una tradición. Esa colaboración público-privada es muy normal para nosotros. En nuestros ámbitos, desde 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐩𝐨𝐿 como sociedad pública del Gobierno vasco, todavía esta legislatura más fuerte esta colaboración con el mundo empresarial porque estamos incluso en el mismo departamento, desarrollo económico y sostenibilidad ambiental. Y la verdad que está funcionando muy bien. Había algunas personas o decían, esto no va a funcionar, el poner el mundo económico con el mundo ambiental. Pues yo creo que podemos demostrar que está funcionando muy bien. Y es lo que dice el Pacto Verde Europeo también. Ejemplos concretos de colaboración desde nuestro ámbito. Tenemos una red en la que estamos dos organizaciones públicas, SPRI e 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨, con 16 grandes empresas vascas, que es el Basque Ecodesign Center, y tenía aquí apuntado cuáles son algunas de las empresas, para que no se me olvide, pero lógicamente además estando Iberdrola presente, las grandes tractoras como Iberdrola, CAF, Arcelor, CIA Automotive, y quizás la gran novedad es que también el mundo financiero, con Kutxabank y Caja Laboral, están en esta colaboración del Basque Ecodesign Center. ¿Y por qué? Porque las finanzas se están incorporando, la sostenibilidad cada vez más se está incorporando en el mundo financiero. Entonces yo diría que esas dos, la administración, la colaboración público-privada es fundamental, lo estamos demostrando con muchas de las iniciativas como el Basque Ecodesign Center. Incluso lo podríamos hablar luego del tema de fiscalidad. La fiscalidad ambiental también va a ser todo un recorrido en los próximos años. Y vamos, yo creo que esas son las grandes líneas. El mundo, cada vez potenciar más esta colaboración público-privada.
Y para muestra algunos botones que ya has compartido. Hélène, ¿desde C40 hay algún instrumento, palanca para movilizar lo privado y lo social?
Yes, so we are mainly an organization of cities. That being said, we cannot do, there is really definitely a need for this collaboration. And if I can just take one example, I was trying to explain, we need the built environment, the real estate sector to change the way they work. They need to stop, promoting new development, to focus on accelerating retrofit. And it's a big change for them, to be honest. But so there is a need for the local government to help them, because this is job as well. So this is the real life people. So we don't want to destabilize this very important. And there is a French expression saying, if the real estate sector go well, everything go well in terms of economy. So the cities are also mindful to not create problem, but at the same time we need them to transform their way of working, to focus and to find financially viable way of financing retrofit of building rather than focusing on new development that have developed crazily for the past decade. So there is a need to work together, first because sometimes the private sector is also the most creative one, so they can also develop technology solutions that we need to inspire public policies, but they also need to make the job to mainstream this type of very good project, because sometimes there is a lot of private sector who are doing two great projects that they will go in all of the good conference saying, oh, look, this nice one, and then they do crap for the rest of the portfolio. So we need also, and we see more and more private actors really trying to have this approach, mainstreaming approach, or looking at all of their portfolio to see how they could reduce emission and align their objective to the Paris Agreement as the city. So a last example, when we developed at the COP in Glasgow, which is a major COP because it was when the nation re-engaged themselves, recommit on key elements, the cities developed something called Race to Zero, where basically the cities say, okay, we will commit ourselves to the Paris Agreement target. You decide to give up on the Paris Agreement, we don't give up. And alongside the cities, there was a group of pioneer business saying, we do the same. So it was very important because it was not only showcasing a few nice projects, it was saying, okay, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to look at my portfolio and trying to have the same. So that's this coalition, emulation, sometimes constraint when you change your building code, when you develop this new rule of stopping urban sprawl, they start to, but at the same time, a lot of them saying, okay, this is happening anyway, so how I can be pioneer rather than following this type of rules. So that's why we need this discussion.
Nos quedan un minuto casi para cerrar la sesión. Os voy a pedir, como en la sesión anterior, una frase para poder cerrar en relación con el rol de las ciudades y las metrópolis en este reto global del cambio climático. No sé si es un consejo lo que puedo pediros, un consejo, una propuesta de protagonismo para las ciudades y para las metrópolis. ¿Qué rol tienen los entornos urbanos dentro de este gran reto global? Para despedirnos.
Rol fundamental, yo diría, y solamente un medio minuto para el instrumento de zonas de bajas emisiones, que ya tienen que cumplir por ley. Está todo muy ligado a lo que ha comentado Helen antes de la visión integral de la sostenibilidad. Los grandes municipios, más de 50.000 habitantes, tienen que cumplir esta legislación de zonas de bajas emisiones, y yo creo que me quedaría con eso. Y la Red 𝐒𝐨𝐻𝐵 2030 es un instrumento fantástico para compartir y ir en común a nivel de país.
Muy bien, eskerrik asko, Alex. Helen, tu receta para ese protagonismo urbano.
So I think we are at a key moment. I really believe we are at a key moment where there is no more climato-sceptic people, if we remove the crazy people. But there is a need to put the topic at the heart of every decision making. That's really what we need to do. There is an inspiring, if I can, example that comes from Oslo, who has developed what we call a climate budgeting. And we are now working with a group of cities who try to do the same. And basically, what is a climate budgeting? It's saying, in a city, there is a finance department. The finance department is looking at every decision to say, okay, how many it costs? But they will do exactly the same process with emission. How many emissions it costs. And so this is really how do you mainstream. And for example, this example, we need to make, to put that in every conference to show that, and so we need to put this topic at the heart of every discussion between the different local governments, between local governments and private sector, and to avoid having that as a, one of the 10 topics. I think it needs to be at the middle of the discussion. So yes, you have definitely an amazing role to play there.
Ok, pues con esto, si os parece, damos por finalizada esta sesión. Voy a pediros un aplauso para Helen y para Alex. Eskerrik asko. Muchas gracias. Y ahora, si os parece, voy a pedirle a Mónica y a Patricia que me acompañen, por favor, aquí para dar comienzo a la tercera y última sesión de debate de esta mañana, que está dedicada a la planificación urbana para metrópolis habitables. Como veis, pues títulos que siguen recordándonos este mensaje principal de Stay Human, Be Sustainable. Tenemos en esta sesión a Patricia Molina, directora del área de Ciudad, Territorio y Medio Ambiente de la Fundación Tecnalia. Y ahora, mientras van microfonando a Mónica Magnussen, responsable del área internacional y de gestión de proyectos de la ciudad de Copenhague, a quien vamos a recibir ahora. Vamos a esperar, si os parece, que Mónica se incorpore con nosotros, aunque la primera pregunta se la voy a dirigir a Patricia, si te parece, Patricia. Welcome, Mónica. Ok. Patricia, desde Tecnalia estáis impulsando muchos proyectos que tratan de aunar sostenibilidad, planificación urbana. ¿Podrías compartirnos algunos de esos proyectos que te parezcan estratégicos y reveladores dentro de ese reto, para empezar?
Muy bien.
Ay, no tiene. Vale. Claro, no me he dado cuenta que también faltaba de microfonar Patricia. Vamos a esperar un segundo, si os parece, por el tema del orden de las presentaciones, porque yo creo que ya están cargadas en la pantalla. Y ya comenzamos. ¿Ahora qué tal? Bueno, igual te tienen que dar acceso.
A ver.
Sí, perfecto.
Muy bien.
Muy bien, pues vamos a ver si está tu presentación cargada, que espero que así sea, a menos que Murphy haga de las suyas.
Bueno, lo primero es que recasco por la invitación, es un honor estar aquí y un placer, y me han interesado muchísimo todas las intervenciones anteriores. Entonces, si está la presentación, voy empezando. No sé si está. Bien. Bueno, lo primero de todo, compartir un poquito qué es Tecnalia para quienes no nos conozcáis, y a ver si soy capaz. Tecnalia es una fundación privada sin ánimo de lucro. Somos el mayor centro de investigación aplicada y desarrollo tecnológico de España y formamos parte de la Basque Research and Technology Alliance. Nuestra misión es transformar investigación tecnológica en prosperidad y ser agentes de transformación de empresas y de la sociedad en su conjunto para ayudar a la adaptación a estos cambios y a estos retos que además se van acelerando, ¿no? Y que tenemos que afrontar cada vez con mayor rapidez. Nuestros ámbitos de actuación están alineados con los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, como no puede ser de otra forma. Estamos trabajando en transición energética, en ecosistema urbano, economía circular, movilidad sostenible, fabricación inteligente, industria 4.0, salud personalizada y transformación digital en general. Somos además la primera organización privada en participación en el programa marco de I+D+I de Europa y somos la organización número 13 dentro de las 3.600 organizaciones que existen en Europa, ¿no? O sea que tenemos, digamos, un posicionamiento muy destacado. El área que yo dirijo, Ciudad, Territorio y Medio Ambiente, dentro de Tecnalia, está muy enfocada a trabajar con organizaciones tanto públicas como privadas, acompañando a ciudades y territorio, bueno, pues hacer frente a todos estos retos ambientales, sociales y económicos, utilizando la tecnología, los datos y la innovación, sobre todo para mejorar la toma de decisiones en lo que tiene que ver con la planificación en los modelos urbanos y la gestión más en el día a día, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo utilizamos la tecnología en planificación y gestión urbana? Pues la utilizamos para abordar el hecho complejo que es la ciudad, ¿no? La ciudad es multidimensional y para ello necesitamos un enfoque integrado porque la ciudad está compuesta de edificios, espacios públicos, pero también está compuesta de actividad económica, tiene unas capas históricas, es el producto de, digamos, de las culturas que la han ido habitando y creando, es el reflejo de esas sociedades que la han generado y todo eso hay que comprenderlo y hay que entender, ¿no?, que es el espacio que da soporte a la vida que se va transformando. Y por eso tenemos que entenderla dentro de una concepción multidimensional. Además, es un espacio que es multiescalar porque trabajamos desde la vivienda, el edificio, las dinámicas de los barrios, la comprensión del modelo urbano en su conjunto y su vinculación con el territorio, ¿no?, y en la escala regional. Entonces, no nos podemos olvidar de que son escalas distintas y hay que actuar interrelacionadamente. Y, por supuesto, la ciudad, los territorios son espacios de decisiones multiagente, donde en los tiempos que vivimos las decisiones se toman entre, por supuesto, con las competencias del sector público, pero, por supuesto, contando con los agentes privados, con la ciudadanía, y todo esto pues, lleva a una toma de decisiones muy compleja que hay que integrar y hacer que, digamos, la tecnología nos ayude en esa toma de decisiones compleja. Y también, ¿cómo nos puede ayudar? Pues de esa forma que teníamos hace no tanto, ¿no?, de tomar las decisiones en base a análisis estáticos, a fotos fijas, ahora podemos tener, gracias a los datos y a los sistemas que tenemos de computación, pues análisis dinámicos, predictivos y prescriptivos, ¿no? En todo ese ciclo de planificación que va del análisis y diagnóstico a la generación de una visión, a la ejecución de planes y programas y a la evaluación, ¿no?, a esa cultura de la evaluación y corrección, bueno, pues ahí incorporamos tecnologías que están disponibles y que quizá todavía en el día a día de los procesos y de toma de decisiones en planificación gestión urbana pues no se han incorporado plenamente. Desde todas las fuentes fuentes de datos, múltiples fuentes de datos que podemos aprovechar. Tenemos ciudades sensorizadas, pero hay que preguntarse para qué las sensorizamos, para qué usamos esos datos, cuáles son los datos relevantes que necesitamos para hacer qué diagnósticos y después cómo modelizamos, ¿no? Qué escenarios generamos, cómo elegimos, cómo medimos los impactos para entender cuáles son las mejores decisiones. Ahí, por ejemplo, la inteligencia artificial puede jugar un papel muy importante, pero hay que entender cómo diseñamos esos algoritmos para responder a qué preguntas relevantes, ¿no? Lo mismo con la ejecución, que nos puede ayudar a visualizar cómo vamos avanzando en esa toma de decisiones y cómo tenemos que corregir ciertas decisiones que se han tomado, ¿no? Y esto, pues, nosotros lo encapsulamos dentro del concepto del gemelo digital de la ciudad, ¿no? Que es esa réplica que nos puede ayudar, bueno, pues en dos direcciones, a incorporar fuentes de datos muy diversas y tener una réplica virtual sobre la que, por ejemplo, modelizar escenarios, medir impactos antes de generar las actuaciones en la ciudad propia, ¿no? Y al mismo tiempo poder estar bidireccionalmente actuando sobre determinados elementos de la ciudad. El más evidente es la movilidad, ¿no? Poder en un momento dado determinado de un evento singular modificar los tiempos de los semáforos, por poner un ejemplo que es muy evidente. ¿Y dónde aplicamos todos estos datos, tecnología? Pues transición energética, importantísimo, ¿no? Cómo comprender, como decía Hélène, ¿no? El papel muy importante que juega el parque edificado y poder modelizar para priorizar actuaciones, para entender cuál es el estado de la edificación, por dónde tenemos que empezar, o dónde tenemos que fomentar esa rehabilitación. También la adaptación de las ciudades para que las personas mayores puedan vivir de manera autónoma más tiempo, de manera pues que puedan disfrutar de sus barrios, que tengan esa ciudad de los 15 minutos, pero adaptada para las personas mayores, que les permite además vivir más tiempo en sus casas, que mejora, además tiene un impacto positivo en los servicios de salud también. Y bueno, pues ahí también podemos estar incorporando datos sobre, por ejemplo, las infraestructuras de accesibilidad urbana, ¿no? Un dato muy importante que es en las ciudades como Bilbao o como Santander, que es este caso, donde tenemos ascensores o rampas o escaleras, si una de ellas se estropea, ese dato puede cambiar el día de una persona mayor que tenía que bajar al ambulatorio. Esos son los datos relevantes que tenemos que incorporar y poner a disposición de la ciudadanía para que realmente pueda hacer un uso activo de su ciudad. También poner, digamos, en conexión datos de redes técnicas urbanas, como hicimos en este caso con 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐩𝐵, y bueno, pues para entender esa conexión entre las redes de infraestructuras y los edificios a los que dan servicio y las personas que viven en esos edificios, ¿no? Esa conexión de datos que muchas veces están aislados, si las interconectamos los hacemos más inteligentes y nos permiten tomar decisiones más relevantes. Perdonad. O temas, por ejemplo, en el patrimonio histórico que nos permiten saber dónde están pues, aglomeraciones de personas en zonas turísticas y ayudar a redirigir pues, para evitar la saturación del patrimonio, como es este caso que hicimos en Ávila. Un tema muy, muy importante, la adaptación al cambio climático, que hemos hablado un poquito hoy, y la importancia de la planificación multiescalar, ¿no? Aquí, por ejemplo, estamos trabajando con muchísimos agentes del País Vasco en el proyecto Urban Clima 2050 y aquí estamos haciendo escenarios climáticos regionalizados a escala región. También estamos trabajando con los municipios para entender su vulnerabilidad y su exposición a riesgo para cada uno de estos municipios y que lo puedan incorporar en su toma de decisiones y bajando al detalle estudios locales, por ejemplo, del efecto de isla de calor urbana, ¿no? Algún ejemplo concreto que me pedía ha sido ya pues, analizar, ¿no? En la gestión de infraestructuras la vulnerabilidad y el riesgo de la red viaria y del tráfico en Bilbao, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en este trabajo que hicimos en colaboración con ASTI, con 𝐦𝐞𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐻𝐸, por supuesto con IOBE, con el Ayuntamiento, con URA, con la Diputación Foral, un trabajo que hicimos para entender estos impactos del cambio climático, cómo realmente empezar a hacerles frente y entender cuáles son las áreas más expuestas y más vulnerables. Empezar ya a actuar planificando, ¿no? Los refugios climáticos que van a necesitar todas las ciudades, tanto interiores como exteriores, se empiezan a planificar ya, ¿no? Porque el cambio climático es un hecho, lo tenemos aquí. ¿Qué pasa sobre todo con las personas vulnerables que en su casa no tienen las condiciones de confort? Necesitan de unos refugios climáticos en momentos de alta temperatura. Hemos trabajado mucho en estudios de estrés térmico y efectividad de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, por ejemplo, en jardines de Albia, bueno, pues trabajando también con el ayuntamiento, con IOBE, bueno, pues modelizando cómo es el rediseño que se piensa, ¿no? y llegando al detalle de cómo realmente los diferentes escenarios abordan esa efectividad en los diferentes escenarios climáticos que se prevén, ¿no? Lo mismo en María Díaz de Haro, que es otro proyecto de renaturalización de una importante calle de Bilbao. Bueno, pues ayudamos con nuestros estudios de efectividad térmica a entender tanto en el estado presente como proyectado cómo esas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza podemos medir cuál es su impacto y cómo va a ser en un escenario de clima futuro ese impacto. Y con esto, bueno, unas pinceladas un poco del trabajo
profundas,
que estamos realizando.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Patricia. Un aplauso para ella. Y ahora, si os parece, vamos con Copenhague. Entonces, ¿sí? Mónica, la primera pregunta que quiero plantearte tiene que ver con la ley del clima que Dinamarca, el país, ha impulsado y que ayer me comentabas, creo que hay un parecido, esa ambición de la ciudad, ¿no? No se conforma solo con lo que esa ley del clima propone, sino que la propia ciudad se ha planteado, si no me equivoco, retos bastante más ambiciosos. ¿Nos los cuentas, por favor?
Sí. I guess it's me now. So I also like to stand up like you. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm extremely happy to be here in Basque Country for the second time for me. So it's very good to be back. I thought I would come here and see spring in Bilbao, and I came and I saw summer in Bilbao. And I just had to check, it was still March. Of course, then it's a good topic to talk about climate, right? When you have a heat wave and you're still in March. Just for those of you who are not completely familiar with Copenhagen, or København, as we say in Danish, because I know that we are doing a lot of languages here tonight. It's the capital of Denmark, and we have roughly about 650,000 inhabitants in the municipality of Copenhagen, and the metropolitan area is about 1.4 million. So I think we're pretty comparable to the Bilbao region, yeah, something like that. We are, in contrast to Wales, a very young place, a very young city. We have an average age of only 36, which means that a lot of babies are being born in Copenhagen. And we have one of the dilemmas from the built environment that Elaine talked about, is that how do we keep prices low without having just to keep building and building and building. So I always think that when it comes to talking about urban planning, climate planning, it's always the dilemmas, the space of the city. How do we utilize this space, and how do we make sure we do it in a sustainable manner that's good for human living, like your topic of today. So I can see these were my old slides. I will skip them. You can just get to see this. We can swim in our harbor. So this is always a nice picture, but I will talk about climate planning now instead. So actually, we have been much more ambitious in Copenhagen than Denmark has, like your question was. And back in 2009, Copenhagen hosted what was then the COP15. Back then, I worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was working on national level, and we sat out at the International Conference Hall, and we had 126 head of states in the building at the same time. So you can imagine the security, Iran and Russia and America all together. And what that COP was most famous for was that it was a disaster. We had to get to Paris before we got an agreement, and to Glasgow before we looked at the industry and so on. But something good came out of it that I didn't know working on national level. That was at City Hall. Copenhagen had invited other city leaders to see what can we actually do on city level. And that's when Copenhagen's first climate plan was born. And we actually have the target, maybe you can see it, to be climate neutral already in 2025. And here is the cliffhanger and the problem. We won't make it. And we just realized this year we won't make it. The reason why I'm not extremely sad standing on a stage saying this is that the climate plan has still mattered so much. Had we not set this extremely ambitious target, not knowing how we would get there, we wouldn't have gotten nearly where we are today. So right now, I think we will make about 80% of the way. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're working and how we're looking forward to the next climate plan, which has just been decided upon with the last budget negotiations that we work towards 2035 for the next one. So the current climate plan has 4 pillars. And energy production has by far been the biggest one during these past 10 years. However, it's still extremely important to look at the other 3. And I will explain to you a little bit about that. But as you saw, these 4 pillars are missing some things. The elephant in the room, so to speak. We've been so focused on changing the way we produce energy that we haven't looked into consumer-based emissions or Scope 3 emissions in this current climate plan. So we're looking to make up for that in 2035, but how do you do that? It's extremely difficult. So we have a plan of now, as we want to reduce the carbon emissions by the citizens, of 50%. And here, of course, we as cities all need to look at this, and we need to see how are we calculating this? Which tools do we have as a city to operate on citizens' choices? What can we do when it comes to, as we call it, FOMO, food, mobility, and housing? We also need to continue to look at the electrification of the integrated energy system. So in Copenhagen, we've changed a lot of our fossil fuels over to biomass, and as soon as the biomass plant was inaugurated, the politicians said, how can we get rid of biomass? So the development is already so fast that we constantly need to change. And then we need to look at what can we do when it comes to buying, public procurement. So of course it's extremely important not to look at price alone. You were mentioning Oslo as an example, that you should have a climate budgeting with everything you do. But you need to go even further and seek how much can you push the market? How much can you change the agenda? If there's a demand, Copenhagen, the city of Copenhagen is the biggest workplace in Denmark. We have 20,000 people working there. We have schools and kindergartens and nursing homes. We buy a lot of things. If we put very sharp and good demands on what we buy, we also change the supply chains and what needs to be produced. Then, even though what we do as a city administration is not a lot in the big number game, then it's extremely important if we go out and ask for citizens to do something, if we don't act accordingly as a city. So we call it walk the talk. So of course we need to put solar panels on buildings, but we also have a food strategy. So all the municipal kitchens, 90% of the food is organic. We eat mainly plant-based. We only have 1 meat day a week, and we eat seasonal. So even though I love getting tomatoes and strawberries from Spain in winter, it doesn't make much sense to ship them there. So we need to look at a lot of things. We look at our own transportation. I'm not allowed to take any taxis to any meetings. I can take my own bike or I can borrow a bike. When I fly to come here, we pay a fee for flying. And I always say, if I go on a plane, I hope you at least get one thing out of it that gets you thinking in your brain. So please promise me that, otherwise it wasn't worth it. And then green procurement as well. So the current status, which we have the 2021 number, is that we've reduced our emissions by 72%. But as the second bit say, we have quite a high consumption-based emissions in Denmark. We don't have the Copenhagen number, but in Denmark it's between 11 and 17 tons. And today is the 30th of March, and 2 days ago, Denmark used all of the world's needs. We had our, what is it called? The World Overturn Day, when we used all the planet's resources. That was 2 days ago in Denmark. So we may stand here as, oh, we're really good at wind power and we're really good at a lot of things, but we need to look at our consumption-based emissions, very much so. So that was a little bit about the climate plan.
Gracias, Mónica, por compartir con nosotros, además con honestidad, un poco esos avances en el reto climático que os habéis propuesto. Pero me gustaría preguntarte ahora por todo lo que tiene que ver con la movilidad urbana, porque si Copenhague es un referente mundial en algo, aparte de estas acciones climáticas, tiene que ver con la movilidad. Y yo quiero pedirte dos cosas. Una es, no sé si en tu presentación está disponible una transparencia que a mí me parece muy reveladora de personas montadas en bici en un día de nieve, no lluvia ya aquí, ¿no? Porque nosotros tenemos culturalmente una excusa para no haber utilizado tradicionalmente la bicicleta, que es que creíamos que nuestro tiempo atmosférico era muy malo, pero yo creo que viendo esa diapositiva se nos quitan todas las penas. Esa por un lado. Y por otra también quería preguntarte en qué momento nuestros caminos como ciudades se separaron, porque no hace muchas décadas que las ciudades europeas estábamos en el mismo punto en el que estaba Copenhague y, sin embargo, vosotros decidisteis apostar por una vía que hoy ha resultado ser visionaria. ¿Nos cuentas un poco vuestro sistema de movilidad?
I was hoping you were asking me about mobility and also saying nice
you don't
things.
Have translation.
I don't have it when we have this.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you looked smiley, and I think it was good things. But so there we go. So we also have some goals here that runs until 2025. So this is an interesting time. All our goals are nearly expiring, so it's time to make new ones. But we want 75% of all trips to be done by foot, bike, or public transportation, and 50% of all trips to school, work, education, etc., to be done by bicycle. There we go. So in order to even think about public transport, of course, that public transport has to be green. So we have a new metro and buses and harbour buses running on biogas and electricity. Current status is that 57% of the city buses are electric. And this has been part of reducing the air pollution in Copenhagen quite drastically and by 85% since 2008. But, of course, Copenhagen is very famous for one thing, and it's the cycling. And I promised 𝐒𝐿 there would be one where we also cycle in winter. Because normally when you give these presentations, it's always summer and nice, and people are smiling. But this was Copenhagen last Tuesday, actually. We had a snowstorm. So give you a few numbers here. Where shall we start? So we cycle 1.4 million kilometers in Copenhagen every day. And I want you to remember this number because it's important for later. Okay, so a little bit of homework here. Remember this number. 1 out of 4 Copenhageners have a cargo bike, like the one you see in the picture up there, and it's often instead of a car. But of course, that puts demand on the size of the bicycle lanes. But it's still smaller than a car, more environmentally friendly than a car, but it's bigger than a regular bike. We have 5 bicycles to every car in Copenhagen, and the busiest stretches see about 43,000 cyclists a day. Then there's that figure up there, the 75%, and that's because even in horrible weather like that, 75% of the people cycling will still choose to cycle. I will again explain to you a little bit about why that is. But then there's the model numbers. If you look at the top one, that's all the Copenhagen trips only. These are pandemic numbers. So the cyclist percentage is only 35%. I've been told that the post-pandemic number is back, so it's up to around 46% again. But I'm not allowed to put it on a slide before the politicians have seen it. However, if you look at the transportation modes for all, like for everyone going in and out of the city, not only the people living in Copenhagen, we have about 21% by bike, 35% walking, 14% public transport, and 30% the car. So still too many cars. It's still a problem also in Copenhagen. But how come is it that people still choose to cycle when the weather is horrible and it's winter and things like that? I always say that you can do this everywhere because it's not something that we were told with a big fancy communication campaign where they're like, oh, please cycle, please do this. No, people in Copenhagen cycle because the infrastructure is there. So if you want to have more people cycling or walking in your cities, in your regions, you need to do it by infrastructure. So if it's fast and safe Like I won't let my kids cycle to school if I'm worried that it won't be safe, right? Then people will use it. So in Copenhagen, the bike, you can't beat anything by the bike. It's always the easiest and the fastest means of transportation, unless it's stolen. And that happens in Copenhagen too. So I think, can you start it from there? Just to show you rush hour traffic in Copenhagen on the bicycle lane. So obviously, this also means that we can't rest on our laurels. Copenhagen has been growing as a city with 100,000 people for the past 15 years, and we need to keep expanding. We need to keep expanding for cycling and for low mobility. However, another reason why we didn't actually reach our climate target is actually due to mobility. Everybody looks to Copenhagen for mobility, but we still have a big problem with cars, and too many cars going through the city. And you talked about public-private partnerships before. I read just in the airport coming down here yesterday that my mayor of Technical Environmental Affairs, who's very kind of left-orientated green, and the president of the Danish CEO Association of Danish Industries did an article together saying they want a congestion ring in Copenhagen. So I think it's a good example that it's not, oh, it's extreme to want to get rid of. It's common practical knowledge that everyone should do, also the industry, because the industry don't want people to sit in queues waiting not to get to work. The industry doesn't want their employees to be sick and so on. So I think you need to think that it's more than politicians or citizens, it's everyone. And when I say we still have a problem in cars in Copenhagen, it's because we haven't taken those extreme steps yet because the political will hasn't been there. So it sounds like you're doing a lot more in Paris of getting rid of the cars, but we've seen that taking down public parking spaces is the best way to get rid of the car. So all the analysis shows this is the best way to do it. If you can't park, you won't bring your car in. And then you can use the space for so many other things. So we said the continuous fight for space. But a few numbers, we have 380 kilometers of cycling paths in Copenhagen and 24 bridges that are made solely for cycling and walking across Copenhagen. I saw you have a few good pedestrian bridges as well. You just also need to make space for the cycling.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so remember your homework. I told you 1.4 million kilometers in Copenhagen. Why is this important? Because as a society, we save more than €1 per cycled kilometer. That's insane, right? And we didn't have this number for a long time. The Ministry of Transportation made this survey 3 years ago, so we found out that the number was actually that high. We knew it would be high, but that high. And there's a lot of factors counting into this. First of all, bicycle infrastructure is cheaper to build and maintain than car infrastructure. So the simple hardware of things. Then there is the fact that time is money. If you get there faster, then you also save money as a society. Then there's the fact that every time an employee replaces the car with the bike, they get fewer average sick days a year. So you are healthier, which leads to a general better health. So you can save on your health cost by having people cycling, right? And this is one of my favorite bits down here, but not only is it good for the kind of city you want and for your health and for the costs, but you have a better physical well-being, mental surplus, and social contact. So why is that? It's because when you're walking or you're cycling in a city, you meet eyes, you meet people. They smile back at you. You feel connected to where you are. You do feel less likely to commit crimes. You feel part of the city. So by having a city that promotes soft mobility, you also have a city that promotes mental surplus in people. We all know it from the pandemic, right, when we were behind the screens and our tempers were low. So it's a win-win-win from investing, and of course then it's also a win for our climate, which we desperately have to do something about. Yeah?
Okay. Thank you, Monica. I'm going to ask you. Tenemos ahora unos minutos para el debate. I have to translate to you better? Okay. I will ask then in English, if it's okay. So you've both mentioned some infrastructural projects that have an effect in soft issues. You were mentioning about how to measure that an escalator was broken to help people, older people, to get to the places they need to. And you were mentioning about how necessary infrastructures are to allow bicycles to run and the effect of contact, vision between people. Are there many other examples of how infrastructure can help to humanize cities in one way or another? Patricia, can you share any, in Spanish, any example?
Bueno, yo creo que el que has señalado es crítico y a veces no nos damos cuenta de hasta qué punto la infraestructura física realmente condiciona la posibilidad del encuentro o del uso de la ciudad, ¿no? El tema de las infraestructuras de accesibilidad es muy claro. Una persona mayor depende muchas veces en una ciudad con una accesibilidad, digamos, compleja para sus itinerarios cotidianos, depende de esa infraestructura. Y necesita conocer el dato, por ejemplo, ¿no? Pero no solo infraestructuras de tipo hard, ¿no? Si estamos pensando en el uso de la ciudad en verano, el sombreamiento de los árboles puede determinar que hagamos o elijamos una ruta u otra, ¿no? Y en ciudades muy soleadas esto es claro. El tema de la movilidad que ha comentado Mónica, yo creo que también es muy evidente. El espacio que dedicamos, los metros cuadrados que dedicamos de espacio público en una calle a un modo de movilidad o a unos usos o a otros, determina profundamente el uso que se da. Lo vimos en Bilbao, por ejemplo, lo vimos durante la pandemia con el cambio de los espacios de aparcamientos a terrazas, que también tuvo su polémica, pero claramente las calles eran otras. Había gente todo el rato en las calles, había el uso de las aceras, digamos, también se amplió porque las terrazas se movieron donde estaban los aparcamientos, ¿no? Y eso generó más espacio para el tránsito o en la estancia de los peatones. Entonces, pequeños cambios en ese uso de los metros cuadrados disponibles que tenemos de espacio público generan un cambio completamente distinto de la convivencia, de los encuentros que se producen y con el tema de la accesibilidad, pues lo mismo, o la infraestructura verde que permite que un espacio sea usable o no lo sea en un momento de verano, por ejemplo, ¿no?
Gracias, Patricia. Mónica, any other example of humanizing urban space?
Yes, I think that climate adaptation has been mentioned a few times, but I think it's so great that a big problem that we have, we can actually turn into get better cities. So I think it's extremely important to do a holistic approach to climate adaptation, get the big mapping together and see, okay, of course we go with urban nature solutions, but is there something we can do at the same time? While we do this digging, can we make space for bicycles? Can we make space for pocket parks? What does this area need? Get a real close citizen engagement in saying, what are we lacking in this area, so you get ownership from it, so that when you have to spend so much money on something to fix everything we've done wrong in terms of climate, then you can actually get something really out of it. So it's an opportunity that should not be missed.
Yeah, you were mentioning also about the win-win-win-win-win-win strategy of every benefit. Are there any other incentives or opportunities that we can put on the table to make this change possible, in your opinion? Or...
Yo creo que medir los cobeneficios en otras áreas menos evidentes de las decisiones en la planificación urbana ayuda a convencer. Y, por ejemplo, los cobeneficios en salud, creo que hay ahí todo un campo real y hay ya gente midiéndolo, pero hacerlos evidentes, porque Mónica, por ejemplo, lo ha explicado en su presentación con el tema de las personas que van en bicicleta, pero si pensamos en las olas de calor, empezamos a pensar en número de personas que tienen mayor riesgo de fallecer por olas de calor, por temas tan a veces que parecen desconectados como vivir en una vivienda que no tiene ascensor y ser una persona mayor que está atrapada en una vivienda, en una tercera o cuarta planta, que no tiene un aislamiento térmico suficiente y esa persona está en mayor riesgo de fallecimiento por ola de calor que si tuviera una infraestructura, porque su edificio se ha rehabilitado, el edificio es térmicamente más estable y además tiene un ascensor que le permite ir a uno de estos refugios climáticos, a un área naturalizada, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, esos cobeneficios en salud también yo creo que ayudan a ver una perspectiva global, incluso desde el punto de vista de los gobiernos y sus inversiones. Es decir, ¿qué cuesta más? ¿Ir a buscar a tener a 3 personas del servicio de salud llevando y trayendo a una persona impedida cada vez que tiene una cita médica? ¿O hacer la inversión en la instalación de un ascensor? Seguramente esto nunca se mira de manera integrada, holística, ¿no? Y yo creo que ese tipo de cálculos permitirían avanzar más rápidamente en este tipo de medidas.
So, money and health on one side. Monica, what else?
I think it's important to think of humans and just humans and not play them out against each other. Because I always meet, but we are car people, we are this, that, bicycle people, walking people. We are just people. And sometimes we need to go somewhere and we can use public transport, sometimes we can cycle, but do we need to have our own of everything? Maybe we can, if we only use the car once a week, we can share a car. Do we need our own summer house always? Maybe we can share a summer house. You were saying about all the vacant places and still we're building and building. Maybe we don't need 3 bedrooms when our kids have left home. Maybe we can live smaller and have shared community spaces. So I think starting to think about different ways to live that is not denying a good quality of life at the same time. Yeah.
Okay, to finish with, I'm going to ask you again in this session a last sentence or advice on how to go to action, from theory to action. Just one single sentence of what do we need next. Patricia, you want to...
Pues yo creo que como sociedad, y además también lo decía Helen, tenemos que tomar conciencia de la crisis climática porque creo que es lo más acuciante y lo que más nos va a llevar a esa transformación de la que hablábamos, ¿no? El otro día en CONAMA, en el Congreso Nacional de Medio Ambiente, habló una persona que había formado parte de la Asamblea Ciudadana por el Clima y cómo había vivido una transformación personal porque se seleccionaron aleatoriamente, al parecer, a estas personas y pues en el proceso de formar parte había tomado conciencia, ¿no?, de la situación en la que vivimos y de la urgencia real de actuar. Y yo creo que eso, en cada ocasión que tengamos, tenemos que expandirlo, ¿no?, explicarlo, explicar los impactos, explicar el impacto de poner botellas de plástico en un evento, cualquier cosa, porque es ahora y tiene que ser rápido, no tenemos mucho tiempo.
Gracias, Patricia. Mónica, what is your advice?
Be brave.
Be brave.
That's it.
The final one.
Final word.
Okay. Thank you. Bueno, etorkizuneko metropoliak nazioarteko mintegieraren amaierara heldu gara. Benetan eskertzen dizuegu zuen parte-hartzea. Yo creo que hablo en nombre de toda la audiencia cuando os digo que todas vuestras aportaciones han sido verdaderamente inspiradoras. Y para despedirnos brevemente, yo creo que un mensaje de optimismo responsable, como decíamos al principio de la mañana. Antonio Guterres, secretario general de la ONU, habla de que la especie humana tiene solamente 2 alternativas, o acción colectiva o suicidio colectivo, y yo creo que este seminario tiene que servir, o su vocación al menos es para buscar esa acción colectiva que nos hace falta. Estamos viviendo tiempos de complejidad complejos. Complexus viene de tejer juntos, de interconectarse, y yo creo que esta presencia internacional y estos retos compartidos hacen que esa complejidad cercana esté presente. Esa es nuestra voluntad y nuestra opción. Somos Metrópoli, Metrópoli agara, eskerrik asko, eta ondo izan. Mila esker.